These storms are escalating quickly. This morning on the satellite view, a convective complex is literally blowing up across Kansas, portions of Oklahoma, and back into portions of Texas, in and around the Childress, Wichita Falls region. And then there's a secondary complex back behind that one in and around the Amarillo region. These will continue to kind of merge together and they will fishtail pushing further east and southeast later this morning into the early afternoon time frame. And then we'll be watching yet another convective complex that's likely to blow up across West Texas. Those will move across eastbound into the evening time frame as well as into the overnight. And those actually even pose a more significant threat for severe storms, including very high winds with that particular system. So if we take a look at the surface map this morning, here's the kind of overall setup. We've got a little cool front draped across Vegas, back into Grand Junction, as well as into the Denver region. Back behind it, much chillier light conditions. But out ahead of it, you've got the warm sector. We've got a warm southwest winds just pumping in out of the Gulf. And we've had a little boundary here. This is a kind of a warm front, and it's been kind of stalling. And that's the culprit of these convective complexes that literally kind of blow up across areas of the Rockies and they fishtail further southeast. And now we're looking at that convective complex in and around the Wichita Falls region this morning, and that other convective complex around the Amarillo region. We do have some stronger thunderstorms out towards Enid as well as into Wichita, and those will continue to intensify and move eastbound as we get into later this morning into the early afternoon time frame. But there's going to be a second round as well, so all that has that slight risk for severe weather across areas of portions of Kansas back into Oklahoma as well as into Texas. We've got two complexes, right? So we got the one complex this morning that's going to push all the way in towards Tulsa, back into Shreveport. Some of it reaches all the way down to the Houston region as well as into San Antonio. And then we have another complex that will likely form along the dry line later on this afternoon into the early evening time frame. Those are going to be posing an initial very large hail threat across areas of West Texas. Those will be moving across into the evening overnight hours, creating kind of a bow segment again. And those could have some very high winds associated with it as they move across a good part of Texas back into north and central Texas. But right now, this is the first complex that we'll be dealing with. This is around noon time frame. So we have that first initial storms that's right now over Wichita Falls that will be moving across. So we have some areas of instability that will move moving across the Dakotas back into Nebraska as well as into portions of Kansas and Oklahoma here. And then we have that secondary boundary down here towards Wichita Falls that will be moving across the Dallas-Fort Worth area back into East Texas and portions of central Texas as we get into the early morning, late afternoon time frame. And then likely a secondary piece of energy that will be forming along the dry line. So we have the first convective complex that will be continue to move southeast, will impact those areas across East Texas and portions of southeast Texas. And then we'll have that secondary complex that highlights across the dry line later on later on this afternoon into the early evening time frame. Those are the ones that are going to be posing a larger hail, very large hail threat. We're talking, we've seen some significant hail, definitely some in the variety of 2-3 inches of hail out there in West Texas, and those will be moving across. So we've got a bumpy evening for the next 24 hours, especially as we get into tonight, because I feel there's going to be a pretty intense, mesoscale convective complex that will originate from that energy out in West Texas, and that will be moving across. This is about 11 o'clock tonight. We could have some pretty high winds approaching again the Wichita Falls region, back into West Texas, into the Abilene region. There's the first complex that is still kind of winding down that will be heading out over Shreveport, back into the western portions of Louisiana, as far as southeastern portions of Texas. But those will be moving across the Dallas-Fort Worth region into areas of central Texas in the evening time frame, posing a pretty high significant wind threat in the overnight hours. This is kind of the wee hours of the morning. midnight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's going to tap into some of that higher instability as it pushes in from the Gulf of Mexico. So those areas back into Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Waco, reaching into Dallas, as these convective complexes will continue to form from the northwest, pushing down to the southeast, that will tap into that higher instability, and that's going to bring them more fuel, to bring them a little bit more intensity. So that's why I'm really concerned about this setup over the next 24 hours, even going into Friday as well. So definitely concerning on some of the high resolution guidance as far as these wind parameters. They're pretty high, folks. We've seen some of these convective complex approaching 60, 70, 90 mile per hour straight line winds as of lately. And again, we've got yet another run of the high resolution models approaching the nearly 100 miles an hour in some of these isolated locations. So it's pretty concerning when you've got these hourly higher resolution guidances kind of hinting at these pretty intense squall lines over these bow segments that would be coming across. Straight line winds can do a lot of damage and take out a lot of power, and unfortunately there are still about 182,000 people, customers, without power in Texas just from the Tuesday storms. And yet we have another convective complex that will be coming across this evening. So heading into tomorrow, this is kind of where we're at, folks. We're in this basically trap. We got the ridge building in from Mexico. We've got warm surging from the south, and we've got this stalled little frontal boundary that's kind of stalled out. We've got a little bit cooler air around the Ohio Valley, but you can see where the northwest flow is, right? I mean, it's draped across this boundary. These areas in blue are actually freezing temperatures tomorrow morning. So that brings in all the cooler air. And also we have a little boundary that's setting up here. This is a cool front. So you got the cold air aloft, you got the south wind, and that is the fuel to fuel these storms, and the perfect combination of kind of day after day of severe storms across the southern and the central plains. And that's exactly what's going to happen tomorrow with that boundary kind of stalled across the south. We've got the south wind coming in from the south there. That's going to put this another convective complex that again will likely kind of blow up across east of the Rockies there, east of Denver, and those will propagate from the northwest down to the southeast and tap into that higher instability, like I showed you, back into the Dallas-Fort Worth area again, as well as into central Texas, southeast Texas, portions of Louisiana for those areas on Friday, and the heavier rainfall too, right? So you've got high water content values pumping in those higher dew points. That's just going to kind of wring out the atmosphere. So it's ahead of the cool front. Like I kind of showed you in the warm sector, we're going to get some heavier rains that's going to push all the way north into Iowa, portions of Wisconsin, back into western Illinois, areas of Missouri, then even heavier rains as it pushes further south into Arkansas, western portions of Mississippi, back into Louisiana, as well as into Oklahoma, and again, a good part of north, central, and southeast East Texas on Friday with a more heavier rainfall like you've seen as of late. So if we sum it all up over the next kind of 48 hours, you can see where all the activity is. It's right really across the middle of the country. The combination of the cooler air coming in from the northwest, the combination of the stalled frontal boundary, you've got the warm south wind pulling in those higher water vapor content all the way to the Canadian border, and that puts the elevated showers and thunderstorms. So these areas in green will likely pick up about a half an inch, but once you get into the blue sector, you can see over approaching an inch. But once you get into the red, that's closer to 2 inches. And there's definitely some isolated flash flooding into the orange region of 3, 4, even 5 inches of rainfall is likely not out of the question with some of these convective complexes over the next 24 hours. But heading into Saturday, kind of the same deal. We've got this ridge that's just been building across Mexico, a 591, even a 594 starting to show up on the map just south of the border there in south of Brownsville. That's again keeps pressing slowly further north, We've got the northwest flow pulling in, bringing in all the cooler conditions that traps the cold front from pushing any further south because the ridge is pressing it further north, and it puts this boundary right across this region. And these cooler air masses will be trapped and kind of forced to be along into the Pacific Northwest and more or less into the Ohio Valley and keep the storm instability to the south. And so as these storm complexes come in, they likely blow up east of the Continental Divide, and exactly where we're going to be seeing them again on Saturday with another system will be moving across, highlighted across those areas of eastern Colorado, back into western Nebraska, back into western areas of Kansas, and then likely more showers and thunderstorms with some marginal heavier rains back into a good part of Texas, as well as into Arkansas, Louisiana, as well as into Mississippi and areas of western Tennessee on Saturday. But it really doesn't end there, folks. I mean, look at the warm surge. I mean, these dew points are just kind of getting insane here. That's 81 down there in the Bay of Campeche, 75 into the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But look what happens, right? You got the dry line. This is on Sunday. Look at the 60s surging all the way to the Canadian border, folks. That puts all the instability well north as we tap into a little bit more higher water content value, higher water vapor, and that puts more instability further north as well, and puts the severe weather further north as well by then. So on Sunday, look at the water vapor, right? You got the stream of moisture as it taps into those. 55 is typically a dew point. That's that crucial line. That's the borderline. But those 55-degree dew points reach all the way into Canada, folks. So that puts the storm placement well north for those areas into Iowa, Minnesota, back into Illinois, getting into Wisconsin. Even on the southern fringes of the Canadian border would likely see some severe storms, as we head into that Sunday timeframe. And right now, this is what the Storm Prediction Center has on day 4 with this another low pressure center will likely starting to deepen with a slight risk available back into southeastern portions of South Dakota, getting into Minnesota. But here's what the learning guidance has as well, kind of elevating that instability right around that low pressure center, feeding into those higher dew points. So we'll have to be concerned about, yes, all 3 modes of severe storms highlighted across the Dakotas, back into Iowa, as well as into Minnesota, getting into Wisconsin. That'll be on the day on Sunday. We've got some pretty high, low-level shear here, around 49. It's not extreme by any stretch of the imagination, but still more instability coming back into play and more severe storms for areas further north back into the Dakotas, Iowa, as well as into Minnesota and Wisconsin. And as you look on Sunday, this is where the storm placements would likely be. Yes, right around where that low pressure center, obviously you'll get some heavier rains. But again, where that boundary is kind of sits and stalls and just kind of festers and kind of gets trapped again. So yes, you'll have likely some more additional showers and thunderstorms draped across north and northeast Texas, southern Oklahoma, back into Arkansas, northern portions of Louisiana, as well as into Mississippi and Alabama there that'll be on Sunday. And then going into Monday, here's kind of what we're looking at, right? So you got still this kind of stalled frontal boundary draped across this region. You got a little trough that will be coming in from the Aleutian Islands, bringing in more, another cooler air mass. Look at the tighter isobars that, kind of tighten up. That's indicative of some higher winds, some cooler air, and some heavier, some light to moderate rains are going to be pushing back into this region. This will likely fishtail across the northern branch and set up across the Ohio Valley, keeping them on the chillier side, while much of the south is trapped into the warm sector and puts them on the instability side with likely more heavy rain. So if you look at the temperature anomalies, by the time we head into Monday with that trough coming back in from British Columbia there, that brings the cooler anomalies back into play again across the Pacific Northwest. And yes, this would activate the dry line again into the warm sector with likely more storms, as this cooler pocket of air will be fishtailing across and likely set up across the Ohio Valley by the time we head into that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday timeframe. So I'll continue to keep you updated on this channel. Make sure you do hit the like button, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and catch my next update where I protect you before and after storm.